Yes.
I was just saying, from nurses to doctors, I asked you to come in something very Christmassy, and you came looking like a Russian oligarch.
Well, this is it. The producer said you have to wear a Christmas jumper, so I explained that because I see a lot of Russian oligarchs in my private practice as a psychiatrist, this is the Russian oligarch Christmas jumper.
So hang on a minute, do you actually greet your patients looking like that?
Well, what happens is the Russian oligarchs turn up looking a bit like this. They just stepped off the private jet.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so this is why I'm looked like this. Well, at the end of the consultation, when they go down to reception, because they meant to pay the fees then, at the receptionist, they always say, Dr. Persaud, will you like girls or will you like guns? They don't understand the idea that...
Of money?
Yeah. That's
right, I see, fair enough. Yeah. Gosh, it must be some practice you run in Harley Street, Dr. Raj. So I was just talking about herding cats day, impossible task. What do you think would be defined as an impossible task? I quite like that one about doing half the distance and then doing half that distance again and another half that distance and then return when you've actually completed the course. It's impossible. You can't do it.
Well, I think everyday life seems like an impossible task for most people, I think. So part of my job as a psychiatrist is to help people get out of bed and wage war and take on what seems to be like the impossible task of everyday life these days.
I would agree. I want to talk about the front pages this morning, and I'm delighted you're here, actually. Thank you very much indeed for entering into the Christmas spirit. Or some spirit. I'm not quite sure what spirit you're in. Let's just look at the Sunday Telegraph front page. Chinese influencer at the heart of Whitehall. That's their headline. The Sunday Times. Andrew's Chinese spy confidant met two former prime ministers. This story is running and running. We talked about it yesterday. The latest from the Telegraph is an interpreter who worked for the Foreign Office for decades. An interpreter also ran a website accused of forming part of a global influence network pushing the agenda of the Chinese Communist Party. This is Chen Shirong. He was an interpreter for UK state visits by Chinese presidents going back to 1999, and he really did get into the heart of government. He sat just two places away from Xi Jinping at a 2015 lunch in Manchester. David Cameron, the Prime Minister at that time, was also there. This is the other bit. He was also a journalist and commentator for the BBC World Service. So he had networked his way in. Now, he is saying he did nothing wrong at that time. He was just a translator. But he also ran this website, Foremost for Media, and the allegations are that it actually is part of the veiled global network of CCP news websites. It sort of makes me think about trust. We let people into the heart of government, into secret meetings, because we need services like translation. What's wrong with a British translator? Wouldn't you think this is a national security risk?
Well, to be fair, everyone's going on about the fact that Chinese are spying on us. To be fair, we're spying on the Chinese, okay? Yeah. So let's just be clear. Let's not try to be too virtuous or more virtuous than them. But I think what's really interesting about the story to do with Prince Andrew is it looks like the Chinese, and the press are reporting various leaks on this level, the Chinese did a psychological analysis, being a psychiatrist, I'm interested in that, of Andrew, and they saw him as being vulnerable because they said he's a bit down on his uppers, he's a bit down on his luck, he's a bit vulnerable, and they exploited that psychological vulnerability. So I'm wondering, with our own intelligence services, why could they not have done their own psychological analysis on Andrew and seen the vulnerability and kind of
protected him?
Yeah, exactly, because it looks like they're sort of playing catch-up. I mean, look, it's not the first time a prince, I mean, basically in the royal family, if you're kicking around without much work to do because you're not going to be a major royal, you are at a bit of a loose end, you are obviously going to be psychologically vulnerable to being exploited, I think.
Well, also yesterday I talked about the sort of 50 catalogues of disaster. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to see that Andrew possibly is a little vulnerable and makes some very bad mistakes. Now, you would have thought that the UK state would have stepped in and at least provided safeguards and railings around him so that he doesn't repeat those mistakes again. Now, Buckingham Palace this morning, this is also in the Telegraph, is investigating visits made by this alleged Chinese spy. We talked a great deal about this yesterday. I mean, this spy known as H6, he went to Buckingham Palace, he went to St James's Palace, to Windsor Castle. He was described as the Duke's close confidant. He'd already been banned from the UK on national security grounds. It also seems that the Duke had allowed him to speak on his behalf in certain meetings. So that's when I get to this notion of trust, because when you start to let someone into your inner circle, and I think most of us do that out of a premise of goodness, we believe people until they prove otherwise, but he'd obviously got himself into that position of trust. Andrew then trusted him and then allowed him to be his confidant and even his spokesperson.
Yeah, this trust thing is really interesting because the link between trust and duplicitousness or lying. Psychological research has indicated, who do you think is the person most likely to lie to you successfully? The person that's closest to you. It's a slightly unnerving fact.
Even though you know that person really well?
Well, precisely because you know that person really well, you trust them. Therefore, they're more likely to get away with lying to you because you're not vigilant for the lie. A stranger
so you're more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly. And also trust them implicitly. So the way con artists work is they do that preamble work, first of all, of building trust, and then they get away with what seems like blindingly obvious, with the benefit of hindsight, deception. So the trust bit, building the trust, and what you should be on the lookout for is someone who wants to build trust with you rapidly, because that's a danger sign, that's a red flag.
I mean, this must have taken place over a long period of time, as you say, building that trust, making sure you ingratiate yourself, doing all the right things, being seen to do the right thing. The Sunday Times this morning, if you are just waking up, it says Andrew's Chinese spy confidant met 2 former prime ministers. When you come into contact with the spare, with Andrew, then of course he opens a number of other doors, doesn't he, into government, into the corridors of power.
But also, people aren't seeing another dimension psychologically of this. But for poor Andrew, and I feel a bit sorry for him, and I know it's sort of fashionable to feel sorry for him. It was his way of creating status for himself. That, in fact, a senior Chinese politician or official was actually hanging around with him. He created a kind of status by being able to say, listen, I know this very senior person from China. This means I'm an important person.
Yes, and of
course...
It
was reflected glory.
And of course, pitched at the palace. This was his opportunity to put his stamp on the world, to say, we're going to bring all these people, like Dragon's Den, we're going to bring all these young people together with the investors. Pitch at the palace was run not for profit. And then, of course, it was rolled out around the world and then made money. And of course, you're right, that is when Andrew thought, I have been a success.
Yeah. Well, in fact, in psychology, it's so well known as a powerful psychological tool. It's called BIRG. It's got an acronym, B-I-R-G, basking in reflected glory. And I think the Chinese actually have shown themselves to be psychologically really deft on this point, more sophisticated in a way psychologically, because we kind of think of Chinese people as not being particularly the Chinese government as not being particularly psychologically astute. But they've been way ahead of us on this front.
I think they are way ahead of us. I mean, there's another article as well this morning saying that the Duke of York may not be to blame for the scandal. Of course, he was played in this by these nefarious sources. Let me just ask you, though, there are some similarities, or am I being really unkind here, between Prince Andrew and Prince Harry, both of whom want to put a mark on the world, both of whom want to feel special, both of whom invent a project. Are there similarities?
Definitely, because it goes back to this thing that's going on for thousands of years, that if you're a member of the royal family or any kind of senior family at the top of a country and you're a bit of a spare in the sense that there's no obvious role for you, I believe more work should have been done to try and create proper roles for these people. Otherwise, you leave them kicking around, guess what's going to happen? There's a famous saying, devil creates work for idle hands.
Doesn't it just? I think that's a really, really fair point, because that person could be the linchpin to the monarch, for example, to be given dedicated duties to act on behalf of the monarch. Therefore, you wouldn't feel like a spare. Let's just move on, shall we? Because, as you know, I'm very passionate about Brexit, which we still haven't achieved. I'm still going on about it. This is in the Daily Mail this morning, and if you are of a weak disposition, don't choke on your coffee this morning when I read this out. Keir Starmer last night accused of forming an EU surrender squad to reverse Brexit. Yes, it was only a matter of time, wasn't it? An all-powerful team of more than 100 civil servants is being assembled to run the UK's negotiations with Brussels. What negotiations? We should be out. That's the whole point. We don't want to negotiate, but that's what he wants to do. Essentially, the Prime Minister is on the brink of jettisoning the freedoms and opportunities of Brexit to permanently lash the UK to an EU superstate. So essentially, Brussels, we know they drive a very hard bargain. They're going to make sure there's freedom of movement for young people. They want us to have acceptance of EU laws and the continued right. This makes the fishermen and women around this country absolutely apoplectic. The continued right for the European nations to fish in British waters beyond 2026. There is a point to this. The reason I'm coming to you on it as a psychiatrist...
I'm hoping there's a point.
Well, the point is they have put this at the heart of government, in the Cabinet Office, right next to the Prime Minister. This is very much the driving force of Keir Starmer. No one voted for that.
Well, going back to your point about trust, what politicians have realised, instead of being honest or brutal truth in terms of what's really going on, they disguise it as something else. So they won't really say that we're rebuilding our relationship with Europe.
No.
They'll say something else, but that's what's really happening.
Oh, common defence. We're working in the national interest.
Exactly, yes. So it's all about words, to confuse the electorate and to disguise what's really going on. Hence the breakdown of trust in our national institutions.
Well, yes, and that brings me rather nicely to the question that I want to ask this morning, but there's one more story this morning. Apparently, according to the Labour government, this is doing the rounds on Sky. More migrants have been removed from the UK since Labour was elected than in any 6-month period over the last 5 years. This is according to the government, so you have to take those sources with a pinch of salt. It claims the government is on track to deliver on its pledge to return more people who do not have a right to stay in the UK. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, says her party has intensified border security since being elected. 21,306 migrants have arrived, by the way, by small boat since the 5th of July. That's the day that Labour was voted in. So since they've been in, 21,000 have come here. Thursday, there were 609 arrivals, and yet they're telling us they've deported more than ever. I don't think many people around the country will believe that and will not trust the government unless there is proof of that. And that's my third example of trust.
But what would count as proof? That's the trouble. The government doesn't seem to be...
I want to see pictures.
Yeah, exactly, but the government doesn't seem to be producing those, and we want to look at the mechanism.
Why aren't they?
Well, I think, again, one of the issues is the breakdown in trust. We don't really know what's going on. We also don't understand what is the new mechanism by which they're going to detect people like this and do something about it. We're not seeing the mechanism. We're hearing the words, the headlines, but it's the mechanism that we need to see in action. And that's why people lose trust, because they hear words again and again, and they're used to the propaganda now, but they want to see something that lies beneath the words in terms of concrete action. That's why Tony Blair, back in the day, created this thing called the delivery unit, which was meant to actually deliver on promises. And again, probably that turned into just a form of words. But it was a very effective form of words.
Yeah, so I suppose where I'm going with this, is it that we're so used to hearing, I'll couch this, blatant lies, that we're so desensitised to it now that actually we don't really believe anything we're being told unless there is evidence right in front of us?
And therefore, this breakdown in trust leads to the alternative. What's the alternative? The arrival, some people would say, of a lot of conspiracy theories, conspiracy thinking, because no one believes any government statistic these days, and therefore what's really going on is left open to the conspiracists to kind of move in on that open territory, I think. So you have some wild and wacky ideas that arrive instead.
In the absence of fact, a void is there, and the void gets filled by conspiracy theories. Thank you for the moment, Raj. Lots of messages coming in. Jane Ferguson, good morning to you. Wow, Dr. David, your tie and waistcoat combo has really woken me up. Yeah, sorry about that. And a comment about Ken in Kent. This is just Cole. He's obviously off his meds. Try and keep it nice, please. I'm asking this morning, how can the Labour government earn your trust? The number 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can message us on X as well. I will read this. Warwick says, this is Warwick in Devon. Good morning. Great show as ever, David. Can I suggest that Red Ken packs his bags and moves to Russia? Practical advice there from Warwick in Devon. Let's take you through the front pages if you are waking up. Let's start with the Sunday Telegraph. This is the story that Raj and I were talking about this interpreter, Chinese influencer at the heart of Whitehall. An interpreter who worked for the Foreign Office for decades and ran a website accused of forming part of a global influence network pushing the agenda of the CCP, that's the Chinese Communist Party. This Shen Shirong was an interpreter for UK state visits by Chinese presidents. Going back to 1999, he was 2 places away from Xi Jinping at a 2015 lunch in Manchester. Lord Cameron, the Prime Minister, was also there. He was a journalist, and this gets worse, and commentator for the BBC World Service as well. Now, there's this report being published which essentially says his website formed part of China's propaganda. Microsoft flagged this. It's called Foremost 4 Media. And it was named by Microsoft as part of a network of more than 50 predominantly Chinese language news websites that supported the CCP. The reason they flagged it is because they appeared to share, all of these websites appeared to share the same IP addresses, the HTML codes, web developer comments, application programming interfaces, and content management system from a wholly owned subsidiary of China News Services. So that's the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. The Sunday Times, we were talking about Prince Andrew as well. Andrew's Chinese spy confidant met 2 former prime ministers. This spy, who became this close confidant, which we spoke about earlier, met 2 former prime ministers, fueling concern about Beijing's penetration of the British establishment. And Raj and I have been talking about trust and the longer game, about making sure that you get into, that you play a long game so that you ingratiate yourself into the institution.
Well, what's coming out from these headlines is how it looks like the Chinese have managed to penetrate the establishment, and people are now backpedaling and thinking hard about how did this happen. Well, one reason it may have happened is we may have been looking the wrong way. Often things happen because you're looking the wrong way. We've been looking at Russia as a traditional enemy, and it's very difficult, it seems to me, when you've got a big trading partner, because we trade a lot with China, to think of them as an enemy and to be more kind of hands-off or keep them at a distance. I think that's one of the issues.
Well, I think that's right. And also, the thing is that successive governments have been keen to say, new relations. We're resetting relations with China. We believe very passionately in China being an equal partner. China doesn't believe that. They just want to flog us goods.
Yeah, how can we make sure that we keep a clear-eyed view of people, that we want their money, when we want their trade? So that's one of the problems. It was easier in a way to keep a close eye on Russia because we didn't do that much trade with Russians. So that's a central question, I think. But we're going to discover more and more, I suspect, in the coming days, how the Chinese have penetrated the establishment as a result of the fact that our establishment has been lured by the promise of Chinese money, basically.
Absolutely. And, of course, we're complicit, aren't we? We all buy Chinese goods. It's easy to do on various websites.
So, and because of the VAT on schools, private schools, our private schools are getting more and more Chinese because they're the only people who can only afford to come to those schools.
Ian Duncan Smith, a former Tory leader, said he would table an urgent question in the Commons tomorrow, demanding answers from the government about how Andrew came to be compromised. This is all about H6, and of course Nigel Farage is now saying he's going to use parliamentary privilege to name H6. I think he's been named in foreign media already. We've spoken about this morning. This is the front page of the Mail this morning. Starmer's surrender squad to undo Brexit. I've talked about this. 100 people, larger than the original negotiation team under David Frost. Apparently they want to have a better relationship, a reset with Europe. But the devil is in the detail here. And if there's anything that we've learned about the EU, is they're very good at negotiations.
Well, the other thing is, if the government's creating what you've termed a surrender squad, why doesn't the opposition create a victory squad, a squad of people, the same number, to keep a check?
Who's the opposition? Oh, I see. So the opposition parties.
Yes. Yeah, should get together and create a victory squad, a group of people who are meant to compensate and look at what the surrender squad is up to.
I would agree, and it's increasingly important to keep the government to account. But again, I'd be fascinated to see what is going through Keir Starmer's mind, particularly when you see the decline in trade in the European Union. You've got the CTTP, which Boris Johnson talks about in another paper this morning, saying, hang on a minute, the world is a big place. Why are we obsessed with a declining Europe? And I think there is a fair point. In fact, here it is, Sunday Express. Took me by surprise. Boris warns of Keir Brexit threat. So this is what I was just saying. So he stressed that becoming part of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, this is a 12 trillion group of nations, including Japan, Malaysia and Singapore, has really only just started. And that's because it takes ages to actually get these agreements in place. This was possible because of Brexit. And if we are in these, which are very fast-growing economies, then surely that is a great sort of weapon we have up our sleeve.
And the other thing is, Trump has made it very clear he's going to raise tariffs, and it looks like he's targeting not just China but Europe. So this is a great opportunity for the UK to avoid maybe the big hike in tariffs that America might impose on Europe, I think.
But can Starmer see that?
Good question.
Thank you.
Can you see the opportunity there, I think? There's a real opportunity.
The Prime Minister is also front page of The Observer this morning. Prime Minister condemned for allowing a new wave of slum housing. This has been bubbling around for a while, but this is about developers building a new generation of what they're calling slum homes, converting office blocks into flats. Now, that seems like quite a good idea, but they're not fit for purpose. And this is, of course, because Keir Starmer wants to have 1.5 million homes over 5 years, which basically is the same target the Conservatives failed to reach. Now, these blocks are on industrial estates or business parks. They have bad ventilation. They don't have outdoor space. The reason this is the article is because in opposition, Labour said they would ban this practice, and lo and behold, they're in power and there is no evidence they're going to ban the practice.
Well, again, we're getting trapped by the idea of the number, 1.5 million new homes. What's going to be the quality of the new homes? We've seen this over and over again in the NHS. People talk about waiting list times or the number of new operations that have happened, the number of new clinical staff that have been hired. But behind the statistics, what is actually the quality of care that's being provided? Because that's something much more difficult to measure.
Isn't it?
It doesn't creep up in statistics.
Yes, and there's another story as well about the types of houses we're building, because actually people need space to live a good life. You don't want to be shoved in rabbit hutches, and I think this is going to be something that they may be hoisted by their own petard. This is the front page of the Sunday Mirror. Hidden scandal of homeless women. Over 1,000 women have been found sleeping rough by charity workers, nearly twice as many as government figures admit. This is a huge story for them. These are called the hidden homeless because they keep a lower profile than men because of the risk of violence. Their average age of death in England and Wales is estimated to be just 43, which is 2 years younger than homeless men. And the front page of The Sun this morning, Eamon, I'll wed Katie. This is Eamon Holmes has told pals he plans to marry girlfriend Katie Alexander. As far as I'm aware, he's still in the process of divorcing Ruth Langsford. And so apparently he's going to marry her. She was seen with a big engagement ring on her finger on a trip to Paris. But yeah, he says he's going to marry her. They went to the Louvre in Paris. Well, he's determined to marry her. That's the end of that story. And then the front page of the Daily Star, this is Martin Roberts, who does a show called Homes Under the Hammer. Well, according to this, it's a room with a woo. He was investigating a house whilst filming Homes Under the Hammer, and there was a spooky apparition.
And did that help the house price or not?
No, it didn't, apparently.
Okay.
So what happened was he went there, and apparently this chap who had lived there had been a bit of a recluse. And what happened, and it doesn't seem very exciting to me, but I was chatting to the person who'd bought it. A light bulb fell out. It fell out of the light bulb holder, which was weird, but it didn't land directly below where the force of gravity would take it. It landed 4 feet to the left. Big deal. And apparently then he's sort of spinning it, saying it was a recluse who lived there. He was paranoid that people were trying to get into his house. He didn't like us being there. And when we went back, the people who bought it then demolished the house. They had the same feeling. It was occupied.
So I think this needs to be part of the survey now. You know, when you commission a survey of a house, you ask for supernatural forces.
Well, this is a much longer story, but I have been involved in a paranormal show many years ago. I was thinking about 20 years ago. But there are things that I have seen that you cannot explain.
Ooh, okay.
And I quite like the idea. Well, you only inhabit, you only rent the property, don't you?
That's true.
This is another whole show. Let's not even go there.